Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to a sixth episode, I would say, of Observability Unplugged. So here, my name is Kunal, working as a dev engineer at Randoli, and this one's pretty interesting because for two reasons, I would say. One, which is it's probably one of the last episodes that we have for 2025. We've got a couple of interesting guests in the previous episodes, but don't worry, we'll be back next year as well. And number two is this is the first panel edition that we are doing with these amazing set of speakers that you see on your screen right now. And today's conversation is about three topics that we have been hearing around lately, apart from AI, of course, which is platform engineering, developer experience, and observability, right? And more importantly, it's about how these three things are starting to collide now in the recent times, right? So, yeah, let's do a quick round of introductions. Let's do alphabetical wise, right? I think that'd be a bit easier. Atul, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Kunal. That's a rare opportunity that even though my alphabetically my name starts first, but then all my life in school and colleges, it started with last name, and I was the last person in the class. So it feels different to be the first person to go. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Atul, and I'm part of Improving. So I lead the developer relations at Improving, and I'm also involved in the platform engineering community at the CNCF, one of the co-organizers of the community, where we discuss everything platforms. The CNCF ambassador and have been the co-chair of KubeCon India in 2025. So a lot of things happen on the community side for me in 2025, and so happy to be here.
Amazing. Courtney, want to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Courtney. I work for Narmada, the creators of the Kyverno project, and I lead the Kyverno community. If you don't know, Kyverno is just submitted for graduation. So please support us in our movement toward that. Fingers crossed we make it this year. Yeah, like Atul, I'm also a CNCF ambassador and involved in quite a few cloud native community groups, as well as in my local area where I live in Spain. I help participate and organize different meetups. And I also participate in the Open UK movement. So that's a great organization that helps provide support to open source initiatives in the UK and around the world. So very happy to be part of their supporting group as well.
Amazing. Yeah. And we're very happy to have you here as well. Ram?
Hey everyone, my name is Ram. I think the best way to introduce myself would be the least famous person here. I just do a bunch of local community stuff where I live, and I have the privilege of working on open source full time. I build communities for a living, and currently I'm focused on two. One is Cloud Foundry, and the other one is OpenSSF. So, in those roles, most of my work involves cloud platforms and security. So, something that developers like a lot and something that developers hate a lot. So, makes for a very interesting day. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Rajat?
I'm Rajat from Randoli. I mostly hang around Open Telemetry and OpenCast, been an open source contributor for a while, and not on CNCF ambassador. I've never applied. Maybe I should. So Kunal keeps saying, not that I will get selected, but maybe I should give it a try. Really grateful to Ram, Atul, and Courtney for being here today. Thank you very much, and it's a privilege to close off the year with such a bunch of people. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. It's very happy to have you here. Because we are doing introductions, I can do my own again. Everyone, my name is Kunal, working as development relations engineer at Randoli. I'm a CNCM ambassador, which I tend to forget sometimes when I introduce myself. That's okay. And I also love to talk about cloud native and open source. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to have a chat about that. But before we dive in, just a few housekeeping notes for everyone who's watching. If you would want to chat with us, I'm dropping in the link to our YouTube live stream right here because sometimes LinkedIn lags while chatting. This is something we have noticed. So this is a YouTube live stream link, and we are also live streaming this on Twitter. By the way, I don't know how Twitter works in terms of commenting, but if you are able to comment from Twitter, that's great. If not, you can just join the live stream on YouTube. Alrighty, let's jump right into it. So before diving a bit deeper into a bunch of things that we're going to talk about, right? Let's set some context for the people and who's everyone who's watching. And observability may mean different things to different people. So let's start from there. Very quickly, in about 30-45 seconds, when you hear platform engineering and observability being used together in conversations right now, what does that mean for you? Right? How do you see these two connecting in practice? And I think we can just do a quick round on this because this is something that we'll be diving a bit more deeper in subsequent sections, right? So, Courtney, do you want to start with this?
Oh man, in here I was thinking, don't pick me, don't pick me.
I heard you there.
Happy, yeah, you could tell I was nervous. So when I hear platform engineering and observability together, and especially after this last KubeCon and this past year, spending a lot of time talking to platform teams, I think about how people are moving from shipping infrastructure to actually owning the outcomes of shipping that infrastructure. I do spend quite a bit of time talking to platform engineers and teams, and they're constantly talking about the paved roads that they're creating for people and the guardrails that they have for their development teams. But it seems like as they're standardizing those things, observability is now playing a role in how those paved roads are actually seen as being reliable and measured to see if they're secure and cost efficient and whether they're friendly for developer teams. So most of my discussions with people have been around those concepts and how they're moving from and using observability to move from shipping infrastructure to actually owning the outcomes of what happens once that infrastructure is shipped.
That's pretty interesting. Thanks for sharing. Atul, what about you?
Yep. So I think platform engineering, since I've been very active in the community, to set a base level context for everyone who has joined in, platform engineering basically is for developers to make their lives easier. You will see a lot of terms like cognitive load, right? You want to reduce the cognitive load on your developers. You want to build paved paths for them. So platform basically provides the self-service capabilities for all the developers so that they don't have to do the operators work or the SREs work. And I think that's where the whole observability integration with platform is very interesting, because a lot of times what happens is for developers, especially the platform team might just say that, hey, here's Grafana, figure out what you want to do with it, right? But unfortunately, that's not what is supposed to be done, because that's something, most of the observability tools I feel were created more for SREs. Developers don't understand them, and I think that's where platforms are critical, because they become the middleware, ideally, if I could use that word. So it's their job to just give what is required to the developers and shield everything outside, basically cut the noise and bring it back to them. So I think that's very interesting, integration of both platform engineering and observability. Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah. Ram, what about you? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I'm going to build on the answers that Courtney and Atul gave, in that I think it's very important and very crucial that developers own the outcomes of what they ship, and that they have the platform that sort of subsumes all of these tools that allow them to do that. And so in that sense, observability has been a thing that people have tried to attach to their applications and workflows in hindsight a lot of times. But I think it's also going through that sort of shift left and being subsumed into a platform that provides all of the bells and whistles, or the batteries included approach that we so like to call. So that's sort of my very cerebral answer. But my knee-jerk answer is observability was the thing of, I guess, KubeCon in 2022. WASM was 2023, eBPF was 2024, and I guess platform engineering is the 2025 trend. So that's like 3-4 years of events and marketing for me, with these two as bookends.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think you all covered literally the three main things that we are going to dive deeper into it, which is the self-service aspect. Ram, you talked about the shift left, and Courtney, you also talked about the outcome oriented. Devs should be outcome oriented of what they ship, right? Rajat, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say I agree with the different perspectives that everybody provided, pretty much similar thoughts. So for me, when I think about platform engineering, I think about two things. One is, empowerment, and the other word is accountability. So exactly what I think Ram said, people need to be able to do things, but also own the outcome of it. And when you look at observability from an ops perspective or an SRE perspective, it's all about reducing MTTR. But you look at from a developer's perspective, it's again about empowerment and accountability. Empowerment from helping them understand how the applications behave, and then on the other side, see the consequences of what they have done, the actions. So in my opinion, there's a lot of synergies between the platform engineering sort of movement and what observability is trying to do from a developer experience perspective. So so that's why I think talking about the combination of it is something important for the community.
That's interesting. Thanks all for sharing your thoughts. That I think gives us a nice baseline for this. Let's zoom out a bit, right, and talk about this year itself. KubeCon North America just wrapped up, right? And some of you here attended. Unfortunately, I haven't attended even once, so I hope gods are great next year. But even if we consider any other major conferences this year, right? In one sentence, I would say, what has been one of the strongest signals you noticed around these three topics: platform engineering, observability, or developer experience being talked about in a same conversation, right? I know that AI has been dominant throughout the year, right? And as Ram mentioned, right, we have seen different trends. And I feel KubeCon is a trend setter, I would say. Either it's an outcome of a trend or either it's a trend setter, right? But if we talk about only these three topics, what are some of the things what's the strongest signal you have heard people talk a lot about? Let's go the other way around this time. Rajat, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the strongest signal that I got was Nginx is no more, which made me really sad. But I mean, it's nothing to do with the topic, but it's worth mentioning, and something to be said about the sustaining communities. That I think that did open up a conversation and sometimes a can of worms about sustaining and keeping communities alive. So for the topic at hand, I think I spend most of my time around open telemetry. I think the project is growing. There's a lot more adoption, a lot more people talking about it. Even when I was having lunch, I was just sometimes quietly listening, and I see attendees talking about, hey, did you check out this talk on open telemetry? Did you do this? Did you do that? So it seems like it's getting a lot of traction. I was very happy to see that.
Interesting. What about you, Atul? What did you see in this KubeCon and any other conferences you attended this year?
Sure, I'll probably focus more on the recent KubeCon, and like Ram said, I'll just build on top of it how every year has had a theme, and platform engineering was quite a theme at this KubeCon that just concluded. So specifically on platform engineering, as well as the intersection of observability, what I've noticed in the last couple of years is that a few years back, a lot of teams were like, how do I start building a platform, right? I don't have a platform. Where do I start? Should I just pull in a ready available product like a Backstage or a Cratix, or and build on top of it, right? So these were the themes a couple of years back. Now it's more like, how do I understand how my platform is performing, what it is supposed to be doing, what it was supposedly it was built for something, right? Whether it is doing that or not. So a lot of metrics and data is now being involved, because that's how you understand whether the developers for whom you build the platform is actually being used for that particular use case. I mean, that particular use or not, right? And I think to encompass all of this, platform as a product, you would have heard this a lot at KubeCon and even other places as well. The whole philosophy of platform as a product came in because to build something, to build a platform, you need a 360-degree visibility and, bring in viewpoints from every different stakeholder that you have. And I think what ties everything together here is observability, right? How the finance folks see it, how the engineers see it, how the ops team sees it, right? So observability from their perspective, obviously looking into how the platform is performing, that's one way to see at it. And obviously second way is using observability to look at your applications or the workloads that you are deploying, right? So I think a lot more organizations and teams now are looking at the success metrics of their platforms rather than looking at how do I start, because I think we have moved on from that stage.
Yeah, definitely agree on that point. Observability for the platform itself, right? Courtney, what about you?
Yeah, kind of building off of both answers so far. The NGINX announcement was a very big one, and people talked about it a lot. Since I am on the community side of an open source project, I think this is a theme that we've now seen start to happen more and more. And while everybody wants to be talking about things that are way more fun to talk about, like just observability and AI and platform practices, the reality is so many of those things are built over open source, and keeping it sustainable and keeping it in a situation where the very, very large corporations that have pulled huge amounts of benefit from it start to give back to that to keep it being sustainable for other people to continue to build on and evolve is going to become the elephant in the room that gets so big that the walls in the room start to crack, and we will start to have those uncomfortable conversations. Probably not this next KubeCon, because like Ram was saying earlier, and Atul also commented on, each one seems to have a theme, and going back to the theme of this panel, what I saw as being the biggest signal is this KubeCon was clearly AI coming on the scene, and that's probably going to be what we hear most about in the next KubeCon. And this push from mostly projects and vendors, but also from end users that are in a more mature aspect of their platform adoption, trying to look at taking platform engineering, observability, policy-driven developer experience, and making all of those things converge in some way with AI, and kind of this hope that at some point that's how AI is actually going to start to influence these things is by being an assistant for those internal platforms where teams can get immediate feedback on things like performance or cost or security at different stages throughout the delivery process, and keep the human in the loop, but leverage AI as kind of a partner and an assistant in order to be able to take the tools that we're already using and optimize those outcomes better.
Interesting. And we are definitely going to touch upon AI, because at this point, if we don't include AI in any conversation, it sort of feels incomplete, right? What about you, Ram?
There's 2-3 somewhat random observations that I'm going to talk about, but hopefully it'll all come together as an answer. So the first one is, I think this was the first time that the CNCF community as a whole, I guess, came out of sort of proxy or a screen or a whale or a shell and said, we're looking to make Kubernetes the best platform to deploy AI on. Now, something like that has never been said before. It's always been pure play Kubernetes and CNCF and all those things. Because I remember very vividly at like KubeCon in Paris, which was almost like 2 years ago now, somebody started saying something about AI, and like a whole bunch of people walked out of the keynote room. Because they're not very interested in it. They sat through all of the other topics, but I think the community is looking to coalesce around AI as one of the many workloads that you can run, but they're obviously going to focus on it a lot. Now, that being said, a lot of the keynotes before were focused on individual projects and tools, I feel. So there was like eBPF stuff on stage before, there was WASM stuff on stage before, there's been like OTel on stage before, things like that. But this year was a nice shift for me, especially because people started to talk about platforms. And then one of the communities that I support was like mentioned on stage by various keynote speakers in so many different contexts. So people in the Kubernetes world, despite all of this new AI stuff that we are very fascinated about, are looking for a stable enterprise grade paved path approach just with Kubernetes. It's like way too open right now. Like, which of the 235 different projects do you pick? What's one way to do ingress versus like 4 different ways to do ingress right now? And why do we need like 15 different, I guess, logging tools? I don't want to be mean or racist towards any logging tools out there, but like I think it's a little one too many. But that's the point. Like, but then everything has a purpose, everything has a utility, everything has an opinion with which it was created. And so you have all of these different projects, one of which is very good for your use case, but who makes that decision? So who builds the cat? And so all of this platform engineering and developer experience and all of these conversations become very mainstream. And if you take a look at one of the videos that our common very close friend Bart has made, and I don't think we can have a conversation about CNCF or CNCF tools without mentioning Bart these days. So one of the videos he made or his team made was about which pod do you install first on a fresh Kubernetes cluster, and so everybody says something, right? And so if you notice the number of people that say Prometheus, you'll understand that that's the gravity that people are assigning for observability tools. It's like the first thing that a median segment of the CNCF community wants. Not that this is a good sample size or this is a great statistical measure or whatever, but I like Bart. I trust his videos. So that in a sense, brings together all of these different things. And I think one of the most random other things that I saw was if you walked around the KubeCon floor and looked at all the booths, everybody this year was either advertising as an NVIDIA partner or put like Mistral and Claude and Anthropic as on their list of clients. So like, again, a little bit of AI domination there, but I think that's to be expected. But in spite of all this, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of demand for a good developer experience through platforms. And I think observability is one of the more key pieces that they want included as part of that platform experience overall. That's my summation of what a bunch of different things that I saw at KubeCon. But like, if I was like a drunk Greek person looking up at the sky and thinking of constellations, this would be like my big pattern.
That's a lot to take in, to be honest. Thanks for sharing so much, Ram. Really appreciate it, and thanks all for sharing your perspectives. I think this really sets up to everyone who's watching. This sets up some nice context for the conversation that we are going to have. We have touched nook and crannies of the things that we are going to discuss, but let's dive a bit more deeper, right? Let's talk about probably the pain first, right? We've talked about platform engineering right now and observability and how we are seeing discussions of using these together and as a shared responsibility, right? Observability sort of started was built for SREs and operations team, right? Initially, if we compare it to the Kubernetes era, similar to how Kubernetes and infrastructure were initially, right? And platform engineering, if as Atul you mentioned, right, it grew as a response to closing that gap, right, to make infrastructure more usable, more developer friendly for a developer. So do you think that observability, if we talk about right now in the current ecosystem, observability is now facing the same problem once infrastructure did when things got started? And where do you all think it's the biggest gap between today's developers and observability? if we talk about in production, right? Let's start with Ram on this one, and then we'll go to Courtney.
Yeah, please stop me from rambling if I go on and on. But observability it's gotten better, over the years. I started off with this stuff back when it was called monitoring, I guess, and then telemetry was hard back then. Uh, it was really difficult to get engineers to go the extra mile to add telemetry and observability. It's become a lot less difficult now. People understand what it is, people understand why it's needed. There's a lot more abstractions that have come in and have made life simpler, so yay for better developer experience. But I think a lot of people are still focused on the here's how I get the business logic of something working and out the door, as opposed to thinking about, hey, here's a very resilient piece of code that I've written that is really worthy of being shipped. So I think it's got partly to do with a cultural shift and a mindset, and partly the technical capabilities of understanding observability and how best to set yourself up for that. And so unless we chip away at the non-technical stuff of this and make people realize that they need to ship better, we're still going to find it, a little bit of a pain, and there's still going to be a little bit of a speed bump along the way in getting people to add this as they ship applications.
Interesting. Courtney, what do you think about this?
Yeah, didn't actually hear Ram because my internet dropped. Sorry about that. But I do think that observability is in the exact same situation that infrastructure is in. We're seeing tool sprawl everywhere. We're seeing fragmentation and lack of standardization in how things should be observed, or what people should be actually observing. We see all of that turn into, is there versioning? Is there not versioning? How are people actually looking into that? And we saw all of those things in infrastructure. So I think observability is very much in the exact same situation. This is clearly a maturity situation as well. We saw it with infrastructure, and things matured and new things came out of that, like GitOps for versioning. So I'm sure we're going to continue to see new things coming into the observability space in order to bridge the gap between things. But right now, I think a lot of platform teams are in a situation where they're still trying to figure out exactly how they're delivering their infrastructure and what to observe and how they're going to actually use those metrics and the observability tools in ways that make sense. And we still are seeing the gap between dev and ops oftentimes, right? Where you've got a platform team that's doing one thing, but then who's actually doing the observability? Is that an ops thing? Who takes responsibility over that? And we see the cultural issue that has been there from the beginning of time between dev and ops starting to play out in the observability space, and the ownership of those things and how to actually make them come together so that people can use the platform in a way that's observable to then optimize it to its greatest extent is something that we're seeing more mature platform teams finding ways to do. But people who are just starting to build out their platform and adopt those practices seem to still be struggling with this.
That's so true. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Courtney. Does anyone wants to quickly add to that particular points? Or we can move on ahead with the next piece. All right. So if this is the reality today, right? Then the question that comes to my mind is, where does platform engineering actually step in? Right? If we are seeing this gap, because developers today, as I think someone was mentioning in the earlier question, was developers today are now expected to see the observability data, right? Have access to that. They have access to logs, traces, metrics, even data like the cost data and security data, right? And this is sometimes without even having observability or infrastructure expert to teach them how to do so, right? So from a platform engineering's perspective, where do you see teams struggle the most today in closing this gap, if there is a gap, right? And most importantly, where do you feel that platform engineering realistically can help? And as we have discussed, right, it's not just about the tools, but there are different things like ownership, who takes the responsibility, right? Atul, do you want to start with this?
Yep, sure. So I think we have always been talking about shifting left, and irrespective of whether it's observability, whether it's security, you want everything to be shifted left, and obviously for good reasons. That if you are able to identify stuff earlier in the cycle, obviously your cost will be lesser effort to fix things, and bunch of other things that are going to happen. But like I said earlier, right, when we just started the discussion, that the context is very critical, right? Especially when you're working with developers, you simply cannot dump them with everything and say that shift left, take care of everything, right? Because what happens in that case is that your actual core competency of your team as well as the core of your product would get affected in some way or the other, because now your developers are spending more time in sifting through logs and figuring out the puzzle between the traces and metrics, and doing all of it because you just ask them to shift left, right? And I think that's where the whole idea of having the platform as a middle layer makes much more sense. And that's where it's important for these platforms to not dump the entire tool to them. Obviously, as a platform team, we would have access to all the tools that are deployed. I would be getting all the details that is needed, all the metrics, everything is coming in to me as a platform team. But for me, what's important is that I don't transfer the exact same thing to the developers, right? And to improve the whole developer experience and ensure that they are not bombarded with all of this, uh, it's important for me to curate what is required for them and to contextualize what is required for them. So as a developer, when I am looking at, let's say, a paved path, right, and a paved path is about deploying a microservice on GCP, for example, right? So the moment as a developer I choose it and I'm working on that particular path, the observability signals specifically for that path, which could include instrumenting the Go microservice and giving me details about it, or maybe including GCP. That's the context that I need. You don't throw things like the entire dashboard at me as a developer and I sit and go through all of it and figure out what's important for me. As a platform team, it's important that I share only those things that are relevant to you, because that makes much more sense. And just not replicate another copy and give it to the developer. So I think what I'm trying to say here is, I, as a platform team, I do orchestrate all the tools and make sure that it's available. But then I also act as the middle layer, as the contextualization layer, if that's a word, to ensure that only what is needed is going to the team that is required, and just add the relevant context and not everything else. So I think that's one way platform is bridging the gap between the observability tools and bringing them with the context closer to the developers.
That makes sense, yeah. And we are gonna definitely build on top of the idea that you shared right now. Rajat, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, it's just kind of 2 points. One is a little bit of what Courtney also mentioned. Like historically, or when like observability has always been the domain of the ops or the SRE teams. And when I talk to customers, what I usually see is, you have the platform teams and you have the people who are the custodians of the observability side, and then the developers. And usually observability is always optimized for the needs of the ops SRE team. And I mean, I have no problem with that. But the developers tend to get left out in that conversation. And teams don't often think about how can they make it easy for the developer population to consume this information. How do you do shift left effectively? And the more mature teams have thought about this, and they have structured their platform engineering initiatives in such a way that it makes it easy for the developers to produce telemetry in a way that it's optimal for the SRE and ops teams, and at the same time consuming that observability data, the insights as well. So they've thought about both sides of that equation, and they've created, working on Atul's idea, that they've created these golden paths to how you should be instrumenting application on 10 different ways. Even with OpenTelemetry, there's multiple ways of doing things. How do you do that? How do you name certain variables so you could do a proper SLO monitoring across the board? Because one team does HTTP dot status code, the other team does something else. So slight differences in even variable namings can have an impact on the outcomes that you're looking from an observability perspective, right? So platform engineering has a role to play to kind of bring some standardized ways of how telemetry is produced, consumed, and sort of observed. So I feel like that strong middleware layer, borrowing Atul's term, is very much needed to make the most out of your observability initiative.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing. Does anyone have any points to build on that particular topic? Cool. So if overall, these are the gaps, right? Let's talk a little bit about what changes when platform engineers or platform teams and observability actually starts working together and they are shared responsibility. Like, let's talk about a little bit about the solution side. So when we talk about platform teams, right, knowing what's running, where and how it's connected, sort of the inventory and the discovery part of it are core responsibilities, right? And observability tools do this very well. They help you discover the services, the dependencies, and the behavior across the entire system. So from a platform engineering's perspective, again, how can platform teams leverage this information, right? And instead of rebuilding the entire cycle for their internal developer platforms. Courtney, do you want to start with this?
Sure. So very much like you're saying, I see a lot of teams that are starting to use their observability as their kind of source of truth in some way, since they're to know what's actually going on in their ecosystem. So the traces already know which services call each other, and they've got metrics to know what's running. And all of that's way better than the spreadsheet that they had before. And so now they're plugging that into their IDP so that they can answer really what before were complicated questions now are becoming more basic. So what depends on this service and who owns it, and is it breaching an SLO? But then I also see on my side of this equation, a lot of teams, instead of rebuilding something or reinventing the wheel, starting to link directly into policy as code, for example. So they have policies that start flagging services without owners or unsigned images or workloads that have different violations. And so they're not rebuilding that discovery logic. They're simply layering on policy over their workflows so that they have that on top of the observability and have a much more clear picture of what's going on and what's already being provided for them with things that they've been using previously. So I see a lot of that going on, where people are starting to interlayer and use observability to optimize tooling that they've already been using previously and have now incorporated into their platform.
Ram, what do you think about this?
I think platforms are really key to getting some of the observability stuff off the ground and easier and all of that. But also, like, it can be a lot of data, and that's where I see a little bit of the bottleneck, which is that there's gigabytes of data that's being ejected from your software in production. And so what's the best way to digest that? Is there a simple way to cut through all the noise and see what's relevant to me. Me as an individual, or us as a team, or this as a business unit, or these people as a department, etc. So there's a lot I think we need to do as a community to improve on how you can extract information from these massive troves of data. I mean, telemetry by itself was a lot of information, but now it's like, because I think this was a lot easier when things were just monoliths, and running as a VM, and it was very easy to pinpoint certain things. But with like a lot of changes on the infrastructure side, it's become very hard. It's become very complex. It's become very nuanced. It requires a lot of overhead in terms of processing all of that to give me like a cohesive, clear answer about, hey, this service is not performing well. Is it because it's distributed in nature? Is that where the latency is coming from? Or is it because the code itself is suboptimal in serving the resources that it's supposed to do it? So there's so many questions I have to ask in turn about my data because of the nature of how we've started architecting things. And so I think that's where a lot of the complexity is arising from these days, as opposed to like traditionally, not having enough information or not doing enough to instrument applications and things like that.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think now, like for example, let's say we have the visibility, right? We mentioned right now that how observability is for platform teams, how instead of rebuilding the cycle, we can use that data and leverage it to build inside those internal developer platforms, right? But when we talk about visibility, we also talk about bringing that earlier in the dev cycle, right? The shift left part of it, Atul, as you mentioned in the earlier aspect as well, right? So from your experiences, what changes when platform teams combine this observability data into developer workflows earlier in the cycle instead of something that is an afterthought after your app is in the production right now? Atul, you want to start with this, followed by Courtney?
Sure. I think on this front, I wouldn't have much to add, because a lot of it is something that I've already covered. Speaking about how you are bringing it back to the developers and how you want to ensure things are in line. But then I think one of the ways that platforms try to do these things is through self-service models, and that is where what you want to do is, as a developer, I just request what I want, and then based on that, a lot of my effort is done and a lot of engineering part is abstracted away from me. So ideally what platform teams are trying to do here is that a lot of SRE related stuff doesn't reach to me as a developer, and I get only access to what I need. And what this also enables is observability is more of a centralized that is available across our entire platform, right? So your platform could be used by multiple teams, multiple developers, and each could be working on a different project or a different feature of an application, and that could be completely different path as well, right? A team that's working on a microservice, it could be completely different for a Golang path, right? And someone who is on, let's say, infra side of things, they're working on Azure, for example, that's completely different. But all the signals that would be coming in would be centralized, because your observability is centralized. And I think with what happens with self-service models, when they are actually implemented, you are actually ensuring that when a developer is opting for a self-service of a particular feature, they have the complete visibility of what they are using and what they are not using. Because prior to this, what used to happen, that as a developer, let's say I want to build an AI application which says hello to me, right? And what I would do is I would request an instance, and what instance by default I would get would be, let's say, a large instance with a 64 GB of your GPU memory, right? Just for a hello world application. And I build my application and I say, hi, hello, all the interaction is done. I'm happy that the application is working. but then I forget about it. And that VM which is being running, if nobody is going to look at it as to what's happening, that's going to just add up to my cost. And one fine day, the finance team will say, the hell is this VM is still running? And the developer would be like, I just used it to run a hello world, and that's what I was given, right? So I think when you do self-service, you add guardrails, you add policies where you ensure that this is what you will get if you want to do this, and that comes integrated with observability. So when I'm doing it, I know exactly what are the resources I'm using, where is being deployed, and nothing else, but only what I need for the self-service model. So I think that is the crucial part, which is what the platform team is trying to do to ensure the developers get what they need at the right time.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Courtney, what do you think? What about you?
Yeah, I really love what Atul is saying there, because I hear it all the time. Policy as code really does fit in very naturally into this situation, because a lot of people use observability and that gives them their raw signals, but the policies actually help them interpret those things into actionable guidance along the way. So it becomes something that's important for platform engineers to be able to actually take action over what they've observed and how to make that actually become something that orchestrates into something useful and valuable for their team. But also kind of going back to what Ram was saying earlier about the just insane amounts of data points that are taken. When somebody gets started in observability, and this is me, it was because you couldn't see anything first, then all of a sudden you could see everything. It was like, there's always this meme of this woman named Oprah Winfrey who's like, a car for you and a car for you. And I feel like this happens to people when they first get started, because you have zero visibility into things, and all of a sudden it's like, and we're going to observe this and this and this and this. And you start observing a billion things that really you don't actually need. And so then there's a certain maturity process that then has to go on as well to start getting over the hype of, oh, I can see it, but do I really need to see that? And why do I need to see it? And how do I apply what I can now see? And when I talk to platform teams, a lot of times the problems that they're talking to me about are not actually operational problems. They're early feedback problems. And what they struggle with, at least in observability space, is that a lot of times the signals that they're looking for show up way too late because they have way too many data points that they aren't actually able to consume appropriately. And so what they're oftentimes looking for is some way to expose those data points, like just the right slice of those data points from their observability early on in their workflow during a PR or a CI check or somewhere much earlier on to make that shift make sense to the developer, but with data points that are the actual ones that they need. And so I think there's a certain amount of platforms, and as people are building them and they get really excited that they can see things now, but then figuring out what they actually need to see and what that right slice of visibility is that's going to provide value for their team. And once you get one slice, then obviously you're just going to keep building that out. At some point you have a complete pack of things that are providing value innately for your team. And that then solves the problem that Atul's been talking about of having your dev team having to be able to manage all of those data points and understand and see all these different dashboards. Now what you're doing is you're giving them observability that's actually useful for them that they can act on. And so I hope that we start seeing more teams go through this process, but I still come across a lot of platform teams that I'm like, why are you observing that? And they're like, because I can see it. And I'm like, that's great. That's great that you can see it. But what's the point of seeing specifically that? I'm not sure I actually understand. And I spend a lot of time then helping them once they figure that out, saying, okay, well, maybe some amount of policy here is actually what you need now that you've figured out that that's what you want to see. Put in some policy because it naturally fits here to then make that an actionable feedback for your dev team. So I love this question because I think it very much rounds out all of the different things that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Right. Let's say that, building on top of that, let's say, we give the exact data points to the developers, right? You asked, like, why are you observing that? Let's say we give accurate data points, and that developer has the visibility that they need, and that too early in the cycle. So one aspect that comes to my mind when we have that visibility and early in the cycle is being accountable, right? So self-service, as some of you mentioned, is a core engineering, right? And but self-service without accountability can bring a lot of chaos, right? So if we are giving developers the freedom that they can ship faster, provision infrastructure, and let's say scale on demand the platform itself, and that too earlier in the cycle, how important it is that they also see the impact of their choices, right? And I remember, Courtney, this is something that you as well mentioned in the start of the conversation. So whether it's performance, whether it's cost data and security, uh, how do you see platform teams use this kind of visibility and the feedback to promote real accountability? And it's not just for convenience, but it's something that's ingrained into the whole cycle. Ram, do you want to start with this?
Yeah, happy developers are the best developers, and you want to keep your developers happy in some sense of them not having to struggle with these things. And so I think it's very important to have the right kind of abstractions and the tools that you need in place for them to be able to do actual work as opposed to being subsumed by toil at the end of the day. So all of these things are very crucial. That that whole list of things you mentioned, the tools to get the data, the ability to have the right kind of data and things like that. And once all of these are there, I guess there's very few places to hide after that. So may not be a happy developer after all. But the point I'm trying to make is you make it less obscure for them as engineers to be able to deliver, and that's ultimately what you want to provide to them as an engineering team.
It's interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And because I think this is a topic which everyone covered when we started the discussion. So, Courtney, Rajat, I would love to know your thoughts as well on this, your 2 cents. We can start with Courtney.
Yeah, I I love how Ram said happy developers are your best developers, but once everything's aligned, they might not be happy anymore. And I think oftentimes that's very true. In this particular case, I personally see observability and platform engineering as being somewhat distinct domains. That said, I do think they then need to become part of the same system in practice. So platform engineering is going to shape how your teams build and what they ship, but your observability really should be shaping how your teams understand the behavior of that production. And if you separate them too much, which is very much the situation that most teams are still in right now, is that there's still this separation between those two things, and you still have these siloed dev and ops divisions that are happening. Because they're trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. But teams that start treating things like observability and guardrails and cost limits as foundational elements of their platform as they're building them typically have better results overall. And I always find it very odd that there's this tendency, and has been for so long, to do the shift left onto developers without actually considering whether they have the knowledge and the know-how to take what's being shifted on them and use it. And then other teams, like a platform team, doesn't recognize that they also need to shift left on themselves, right? Which it would be taking things like observability and policy and security and putting that into the practice from the very beginning. It's not just a matter of going and finding tools and putting them together in different ways. It's very much the basic fundamental practices and the foundations that you want to have at the end should be part from the very beginning of building that platform. And so oftentimes we see people or teams shifting things left on dev teams, also on ops teams, but they don't always shift left on themselves. And we're kind of at a point where we're seeing platform teams starting to recognize as they mature, that they can't really leave things like security and observability and those foundational elements of what they want their delivery platform to look like for later, and pick out tools first. They actually need to have that from the very beginning, ingrained in what's going on as they decide what their platform is going to look like and as they're building it. Because if not, they also don't have context. They end up having to go back and redo things. And having observability from the beginning as well as security actually makes their job easier, and then gives context to their dev team to keep their dev team happy, but also to make it clear that they don't have places to hide along the way, as Ram was saying before.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's interesting. Rajat, what about you? What do you think?
I'm a big believer in accountability, but for that to work properly, you need to provide the data, you need to provide the visibility for the engineering teams to make those decisions, right? And I think Ram and Courtney both talked about this, about the influx of data. There's no shortage of dashboards and telemetry data these days. And it's harder to pick the signals from all of the data. So I think part of the platform engineering initiative could be at an organization is to figure out a curated set of data that you shift to the developers. You need to shift the right kind of information in the right format that makes it easy for them to understand, because they also have 10 other different things to do. So if you can provide that curated view in the form of a platform engineering initiative, then the developers will respond better, and they will be more happy, like Ram said. I think a lot of people, when presented with data, will make rational decisions, not always, but most of the time. So the job is to provide that kind of information in a format that is easy for them to understand and make those decisions. And then also build other platform engineering initiatives to build those guardrails to sort of catch those things, right? Like policy as code, and other sort of ways to figure out nobody has spun up an instance and forgotten about it. And that is actually a real problem. When I talk to customers, that's one of the main things they talk about from a cost management perspective. People have spun up test environments and other things and forgotten about it. Happens in large organizations, right? If you have $1 million cloud bill, what's $10,000? It's hard to see. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, from a platform engineering perspective to help bring that accountability, not just on the development side, but also on the ops and other aspects of the organization.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, definitely agree with all those points. So we have talked about discovery, right? We talked about having that early visibility earlier in the cycle. And lastly, which is, I think, one of the most important, which everyone talked about, is ownership and having that accountability, right? But I feel that none of this works unless these two teams build together, right? And not in isolation. So we talked about those shared responsibility, right? And I think hearing all this conversation, people would say, yeah, it's obvious, right? There is an aspect of shared responsibility. But in real world, it's harder to execute, right? These two teams building together, and we have already talked about the gap, right? So what are the challenges have you seen when organizations are trying to bring platform engineering and observability together in the same conversation? Ram, do you want to start with this?
Yeah, in year 2020, I think we discovered that humans are the virus, because we ruined traffic, we ruined the roads, we spoiled pretty much everything that was around us. And if you bring a bunch of humans together to try and write software, it's very hard to get them to agree on what the best way to do something is. So I think when you talk about a bunch of different people trying to put something as complicated as a piece of software together, I think opinions will fly in from like everywhere. And it certainly is very difficult to get people to agree on the best path for processing metrics and what the best metrics can be and what we should target and what we should prioritize and things like that. So I think there's always going to be friction within the organization. And I think any good engineering manager would just pick the path of least resistance and continue to push the team forward as best as they can. And you should definitely leave scope for improving things, be open to feedback, all that, laundry list of things. Very hard to get things right the first few times. I don't want to say the first time and put more pressure on poor managers, but it's hard to get these things right. It's very difficult to build consensus amongst a set of human beings who are writing things. And especially in smaller teams and newer teams, you have a lot of, like, you have to front end a lot of just team dynamics and things like that, and build shared understanding, and among that, stuff about observability, stuff about platforms and things like that. So it's probably the more difficult problem to crack than any of the technical aspects of all of this. It's probably easier to figure out how you want to do, I don't know, LLM monitoring or MCP monitoring or what have you, compared to getting human beings to agree on common standards and best practices and all of that. So yes, it's a challenge, but also I think we have to embrace that, and it comes with territory. And I wish I could say we've been getting better, but I don't think so, man. It's a struggle, and we just have to chip away at it and do our best.
And we'll definitely build on top of that, right? Like what successful organizations are doing. We'll come to that. Atul, what do you think? What challenges have you seen?
I think I'll totally agree to what Ram has said, and even from my discussions that have happened in the various meetups that I've been to, especially from platform side of things, it's one thing that I've learned a lot later than I should have, that tools are always the least problematic thing, or probably the last thing that you should worry about. It's the people, because it's the people, it's the processes. These are the major roadblocks or hurdles that you will actually face, and only after you clear all of this is when you realize, okay, you have the right answers to all the questions that you had, right? So for instance, when you talk about platforms, right, the platform team would be like, hey, observability is not my task, it's the SRE team's work, right? SRE teams will be like, observability is not my part, platform should be abstracting it, and it's not something that I'm supposed to do. And while these two guys are fighting, developers like, okay, you're not giving me what I need, and then I'll ship something ridiculous, and then you are going to come back to me again, right? And that's why I think clear ownership is very critical. And when Ram mentioned happy developers is the need, when they are happy, you have good output. I think one of the key things that a lot of us have been discussing in the platform side of the world is thinking of it as a product, because the moment you bring in the product philosophy to anything that you are building, you'll try to bring in all the different factors that are going to affect the outcome of that particular product. So in this case, when you're building your platform, you'll obviously think about the developers first who are actually going to use your platforms, right? So you will take their perspective. You will take the perspective of SREs who are going to be, monitoring that platform or using that platform, or maintaining the reliability of that platform. You'll bring in the inputs from the platform teams. You'll bring in the inputs from the managers, right, who would be using it to see how things are happening, from the senior leadership, from the finance team. So the more data that you get in, the more people that are involved at the start, like Courtney said, you want to incorporate all these things right from the beginning. So when you are trying to work on all these things at the beginning, and when you have input from all these people, it's easier to get consensus at that point in time, rather than you have already started building the bridge, you have made few pillars, you have had a few layers on top of it, and now someone says that, hey, this bridge should not go on the right, it should go on the left. That's not the time that you can take that decision, right? You already have the tools that are required, but these are the decisions that needs to be taken earlier. So TLDR, ownership is always critical. Tool sprawl is always a problem, but then that's a problem that comes very late in stage once you have figured out all of this.
Very interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So let's say we want to flip the model, right? Ram mentioned that there's a more difficult problem to track as compared to others, but we wouldn't want to leave the audience without discussing solutions, right? So from your experiences, what are successful organizations doing to doing differently to, and especially mature organizations, when it comes to aligning platform and observability? How does this coordination actually looks like in practice, if I were to phrase it that way? Courtney, do you want to start? Um, are you able to hear me? Oh, okay. All righty. Rajat, what about you? Let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. The way I've seen successful teams operate, it's less about the tooling. It's mostly about the people and the process. I think if you can get the people and the process right, everything else falls into place. I think the hardest part would be the people, like Ram and Atul mentioned, getting everybody on the same page. If the teams are aligned and people buy into those processes, then it becomes a much more successful endeavor. And in all the, like, during the consulting times, that's what I've seen. It's not the tools that made the difference; it is the people coming together that made the difference in successful organizations.
That makes sense. Yeah. Ram, what about you? What are successful organizations doing according to you?
They struggle and settle. uh, that's sort of what I've seen, and also it's very hard for one unit to have the same kind of footprint as another, even within like the same organization and things like that. It it's really a function of what services you're building and what you're responsible for at what points in time, plus what verticals you belong to, things like that. So uh, uh, um, your definition of what you want to observe can be drastic from what somebody else is observing, to be honest. And so I think teams have to figure out what they care about the most and design their observability criteria around that. And I've seen a bunch of people do this extremely well. uh, Without some of the biggest banks that you can think of, big financial institutions, I've seen them do exceedingly well. An automobile company who's exhibited at KubeCon a few times, I've seen them do some wonderful things. And so I I think there's a lot that has happened in the past few years in terms of how much of collective effort the community has put in. I think the hotel community at large has done amazing things for people who have struggled with some of these things, and I think it's also led to like good outcomes. For example, open cost. Um, I love that project. Uh, I don't have an open cost T-shirt though. To think of
I'll
it.
give it to you. I'll give it to you.
Thanks. Um, it, it stems from a lot of observability data. So if you look at open cost as a tool, it takes Prometheus data and just scales that information by cost, and so it gives you a metric of here's how much these resources that have been consumed are actually costing you by using your infrastructure provider's API to get the best um, estimate of costs, etc. So I think observability has played a very key role in a lot of these things, but it looks drastically different for many different teams. And so I think it takes a little bit of figuring out, in my opinion. And so um, again, a lot of people are doing great things. They're fine tuning, which is the original question. Sorry, I keep going in directions, but the as long as you can find a way to narrow down your focus on what you care about the most, I think um, doing that will allow people to actually succeed in their observability efforts. And if you can replicate that across a lot of the stuff that you're doing, I think you can continue to repeat those successes.
It's interesting. Courtney, you are right on time. You just missed a couple of interesting points. So let's start with you. What do successful organizations do, according to you?
Yeah, so sorry about super windy and my internet keeps dropping off. So
Nice.
I do see a lot of people who are successful, very much doing what Atul was talking about before and taking a product approach to what they're doing. When they take an internal product approach, they actually get to a point where observability and the platform team start sharing a customer. Then they have shared standards that they're doing to please that customer or to attend to that customer, and then shared policies and shared guardrails and so they start measuring and thinking about the same things and figuring out what the results are going to look like, because they're looking at it serving a customer that's the same what's the same person, and so they have to find a way to do that together. So I see a lot of people who do joint platform and observability working to find their instrumentation standards or to come up with SLO templates, to create their cost or security policies. Also lots of people that get together to establish workflows that are automatically going to generate their instrumentation or lead into dashboards in a way that are a lot more clear, so that people have actionable data points that they're drawing from. And then the big word that we've all kind of danced around, but the clear accountability for platform is providing the guardrails, and service teams are owning their SLOs and staying within their policy boundaries and observing back the information they need in order to be able to take the actual accountability for the things that they're supposed to be responsible for. So the teams that I talk to, they're all obviously the most mature teams at this point, because they've kind of gone through a lot of growing pains to get to a situation where they're starting to realize that they're going to have to work together to actually provide a service to their customer. And they do a lot of giving back to the community in terms of talking in that way and giving talks, and people like Atul and the working group that he's involved in, basically moving forward and saying, hey, we've already been through this whole learning curve. And so here are different ways that we're putting things together so that younger teams that haven't actually hit all those pain points yet can kind of get past them first with their own working groups to define their policies and their instrument and the data points that they want to observe, and get to a point where they're all starting from the same starting point instead of coming in at a later point in time, to kind of help shorten that feedback.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Thank you for sharing. Atul, I know you mentioned a couple of points in the previous questions, right? You talked about ownership and platform as a product, but if you would just emphasize, if you want to emphasize on one aspect of this, what's the one successful thing that you have seen organizations do differently to align these two things together? What's that one thing?
I think I'll build upon the product thinking here, and I'll drop one word that is used very widely and popular nowadays in context of AI. That is context. And I think context is very important to everything else. So even when you talk about platforms, right, every team needs to, especially the platform team, needs to have the right context, because only when they have the right context, the right things would be delivered to the right team, and it could be done either through your service templates that you're having, or whether you're creating the golden paths or whatever you're building, right? So I think in to just sum up what everyone said here, right? I think I would just add the context over here, and that would start making a lot of sense. Obviously, not every organization or every team would have that clarity right from the word go, but then obviously these are the things that takes a few iterations to get to the sweet spot that they want. And I think that's where the whole idea of getting everyone on board right from day one will help you give the correct picture that you need, and then move in the right direction at the right pace.
Thanks for sharing that and putting it so nicely. just to conclude, right, we've been talking a lot about different aspects of platform engineering observability together, and I think instead of a closing remark, it would make a lot more valuable if we give something to the audience to envision for the future. So if we look at 2026 now, we are just uh, near to the end of this year. How fast did it go? I don't even realize. But if you look at 2026 and beyond, where do you think this discussion will go of platform engineering and observability, where it is headed? Especially, as Atuli mentioned, especially when AI is entering every nook and cranny of the discussion. So, what's that? What's that one shift that teams should prepare for now? If I put it in that way, Ram, do you want to go first for this one?
Sure. I think there's a few things that will dominate the conversation. Being able to narrow down on a platform and use some mainstream paved paths as a container orchestration abstraction or substrate is sort of going to dominate the CNCF space, I guess. I hope. And there's a few players there who are doing quite well. And consequently, I think being able to describe the system in terms of this is how I want it to perform, this is how I want it to respond, and things like that will give rise to here's how to make that system observable and better, and things like that will will really start to come up. And I think observability, like everything around us today, is going to have to try and include some of the AI stuff that's going on, which I think will be a loud conversation, not necessarily a valuable one. Um, I don't know if I'm going to get brickbats for saying this, but that's going to be 2026. Maybe it'll become more sensible in 2027. I don't know, but uh, but I think that's going to become like a key area in 2026 is to figure out what are the pillars of AI monitoring and AI observability, and what is that, four golden signals that we have for like regular observability, I guess. So what are the golden signals in the AI world, I think, is something else that we're going to have to come up with. So I see a few themes here that this space is going to be dominated with. But it's all very interesting stuff. It's all pushing the whole observability and platforms space forward. So I think the cloud native community will be better for it. The AI community will certainly be better for it. And we're going to see a lot of new uses come up for these tools that we've spent the past 5, 8, 10 years perfecting and building on.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for sharing. Courtney, what do you think?
Yeah, AI is everywhere, and I think we're going to hear it, people trying to use it in ways that don't make a lot of sense, and other people who will use it in ways that make a lot more sense. And like everything, there will be a whole learning curve and maturity that we'll have to go on to actually get to an endpoint where there's some sort of standardization in its usage. Specifically in the observability space, at KubeCon, it was incredible the number of people who were talking about how AI can be used in order to help people with different toil aspects of their platform and managing those things. And so whether we agree with it, like it, find it useful or not, I think there's going to be a continued conversation around that. I think there's a lot of value in some things. I think other things are yet to be seen. But I do think there will be a push for internal platforms to evolve into an AI-assisted system of sorts, so that AI can help with automating and helping use tools like observability or cost tools or policy tools. I also think that teams are going to be looking for different ways to use AI to help them prevent their misconfigurations and to kind of make their telemetry easier to consume. That said, AI needs super high quality signals to give high quality output, and it needs explicit guardrails around things that we haven't really even put into practice. And while there are a lot of organizations who are investing in this, in observability and everywhere else, I think we're at a point where this next year, we're going to start hearing a lot more conversations around how we're collecting all of the data that we're collecting, making that data structured and contextual and clearly governed to then feed that to AI in a way that's actually useful for people. I think those are the basic steps that everybody's jumped into this AI space without actually establishing those base ground rules yet. So I think there will be a lot more pulling back and going, oh, maybe we need to have these conversations first and kind of start building those practices first about data collection and the structure and context and how it's governed to then get to the point where we want to be with AI. So that's what I think we'll be hearing next year.
Thanks for sharing. Atul, what do you think? What do you envision for 2026?
I think Ram and Courtney did mention a lot of things, and I quite agree to whatever they said. Obviously, like Courtney mentioned, if you need AI to give you good results, the input should also be good quality, right? You provide it with good signals, you'll get good output. And right now, if you see, AI is doing almost everything, or all of us are using AI for a bunch of things, right from asking it to deploy my application and start a cluster to even write my code, write my test, analyze my logs, find the pattern. So AI is already doing all of this, right? So what I probably feel would happen, or again, I would like to bring in that word context. That is something that a lot of us, or a lot of folks in the industry would be working to on how to improve that context. I spoke about this at KubeCon as well with a lot of people, that right now what happens is, for the same input that you give to the AI model that you're using, you get a different output, and that's the problem, right? It still hallucinates, and the better the signals that you provide to it, the better the output it will give you. And that's where the context matters a lot. So that is one thing that context is what would be in focus. Second, a lot of problem that you see even now, even with case of platforms that have actually solved this problem to a certain extent, is context switching between tools. So as a developer, when I'm writing my code, if something goes wrong, I go to tool A and see what has gone wrong. Tool A will tell me that, hey, I have this. To find this, go to tool B, and then it'll go to tool C. And then if you see, they're just giving all tabs and shifting between different tools and different windows. So what I also see is that all of these things would be part of my natural workflow within the IDE that I'm using, and a lot more of it will become conversational. So when I'm writing a code now, vibe coding is already happening, right? I'm asking Copilot to do something for me, or I'm asking Cursor to do something. When I'm doing that, and when it fails, I naturally will just query, hey, can you just tell me what failed there, or why it failed there? And that's the thing that is going to happen. So a lot more switching that is happening outside the IDs will come within the IDs that they're using, and then the whole context switch would become much more lesser. But then all of this requires good signals, good context, so that the AI tool that you're using understands exactly what you're doing, what you need, and you get the right information when you need, instead of you going out. So I think that's the focus area, maybe in the next year, or maybe a few months down the line from my side.
Thanks for sharing. And Rajat, what do you think?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I'd agree with all of them. I personally think there'll be a lot of focus on AI ops, AI-driven observability, and pretty much AI-driven anything. But we will also have to take a step back and look at like the foundation. Do we have the right kind of data? Everybody's talking about that, right? Like, do we have the right signals? Do we have the right data? Do we have the right data classification, so that you prevent accidental leakage of sensitive information? There will be a lot more focus on authentication, authorization, governance around all of this. It's great to connect all these different systems, but you also want to do it in such a way that you don't compromise data security. You want to make things go faster, but without sort of breaking things or causing issues. So there will be a bit of a pullback, like Courtney said, and people taking a deeper look at how do we take this and kind of run with this at enterprise scale, or how do we make this more viable to be used in actual production situations without compromising security or availability, or unintended consequences of AI deleting something or restarting things that they shouldn't be. So there will be a lot more focus on the governance aspect and the security aspect of it.
Alrighty, thank you so much for sharing. Finally, we are at the end of this particular discussion. To be honest, I don't want it to end, but thank you so much for everyone to share your perspective. Thanks for everyone who joined us live. I see we have a couple of people still watching, so thank you all. I know we weren't able to take any questions, but we are a little bit over time. So feel free to comment down your questions, because the recording of this will be available. So, and I'll definitely ping our speakers too, if they can take out some time to answer those questions as well. And feel free to follow everyone. Not feel free, I would say make sure to who's in the panel today. You can find them very easily throughout the entire social media network. I would say all of them are very active, and you can definitely reach out to them. But yeah, thank you so much everyone in the panel today for taking out your time. Really appreciate it. And yeah, let's have a great day and the rest of the year, whatever is left of that. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye bye.
Thank
Thank you so much,
you.
everyone.
Bye.